Hello, I'd like to welcome you to this fifth book that we're going through as we're going from the authors who wrote the least amount on up to the authors that wrote the most. And we're at the fifth author, Nahum, who wrote the book of Nahum. It's after the fourth book was the book of Jonah. And the book of Jonah was all about this man, prophet, is named by Jesus, that went the opposite way of the way he was called by God. God told him to go to Nineveh and to tell them that it was going to be destroyed. But Jonah went the opposite direction. And as we find out, God did spare Nineveh. But in the book of Nahum here, which is a little later, we see Nineveh being brought up again. It happens to be the next chapter in the size. So it's kind of amazing it worked that way. And Nahum, the prophet, is going to bring up the word of God to us about Nineveh and other things that will come through this small book. And again, I'm going to be using the yellow numbers will correspond to the English derivatives of the Greek New Testament, and the blue numbers will correspond to the grammar of the analytical lexicon of the Apostolic Bible found on our website. The analytical lexicon isn't quite done. It's only the first 500 numbers actually, but we're working on it. And the other color is the orange, which means that that word doesn't appear in English derivatives like the yellow one does, but we will be featuring it, and you can add it into that book if you would like. So now we'll go through this book, and chapter by chapter we'll read the Greek, and it begins, Lima Ninevei Vivlion Orasios Nahum to Elkaseu, the concern, the Lima for Nineveh. Nineveh was a city that was in the northern part of the Mesopotamian Valley by Mosul today, which is in Iraq. If Iraq is still around when people listen to this seminar, much maybe years ahead, and Nineveh was a great city. As Jonah took 3 days to go around it or through it. It was a capital of the Assyrian Empire, one of the capitals. Sennacherib, the king mainly, who comes against Israel and Judah. And so Nahum is bringing this concern, and it continues the scroll of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. So he wrote this vision that he saw on a vivlion, a scroll. We have the Bible from that word, vivlion. In verse 2 it continues, Theos zelotis ke ekthikon Kyrios, meta thimu ekthikon Kyrios tus hypnatius avtu, ke exateron avtos tus ecthrus avtu. Theos, theology, derivative. Zeloti, zeal, being a derivative, is jealous. And the Lord, the Kyrios, is punishing. The Lord, the Kyrios, is punishing with rage, thimu. We have the English derivative fume, which comes from that. At least that's what the dictionary has. And the Lord is punishing his adversaries and lifting away himself, the avtos, automatic, something to do with the self, automatic, something that works by itself, and lifting away himself, his enemies. So God allows people to do bad things. It's obvious in this world, but the Lord avenges punishment on his adversaries, and he lifts away his enemies. And it continues in verse 3. Kyrios makrothimos ke megali, e eskis avtu, ke athon uk athosi Kyrios, in syntelia ke in sisismo, e othos avtu, ke nephele koniartos podon avtu. The Lord, Kyrios makrothimos. We have macro being the first part of this word, the compound word. Macro, uh, something that covers all-encompassing sort of. Themos, the fume. But in this way, it's instead of being mad, it's this fume can be for good or can be for bad. It depends on how he feels, and it's something that's strong. He's very lenient. In this case, there's a lot of Greek words that can have different meanings depending on the context, like a recompense. A recompense can be good if you are doing something that is worthy of a reward, or it can be punishment if you're doing something that's bad. So the Lord is lenient, ke megali, and great. Mega is his strength. The Lord, Kyrios, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll follow that. The Lord will not acquit one is innocent. So there's two different things. The Lord is punishing in verse 2, punishes his adversaries, but again, the Lord is lenient. And so God has these attributes that are the opposite in some ways. And he will not acquit one is innocent. So if a person is guilty, the Lord is the perfect judge. They're not going to be found innocent. And of course in the New Testament this theme changes with Christ being our redemption, our Redeemer, who buys us from out of this state of being found guilty and facing judgment by God. And judgment by God has to be righteous, and he will not acquit one as innocent. But we are not innocent, but Christ has paid the price. We'll get that when we get into the New Testament. And it continues, his way, othos, the cathode, electric current, a way of electric current, the othos, his way is by consummation and by a rumbling. Sisismo, or shaking. Sisismo is a seismic, is the derivative of earthquake. And in this case, a rumbling. It could be even an earthquake. And the clouds, nephele, or clouds. We have a nepho scope. Nepho is a prefix for clouds. The clouds are as the dust of his feet, podon. We have a tripod, the pod, it has to do with feet, and tripod, 3-foot instrument. The clouds are as the dust of his feet. So the image is of God being on high, and all the things of the earth being under him. In verse 4, it continues, apilon thalasi ke xirenon aftin, ke pantas tus potamus exerimon, oligothi e vasanitis, ke o carmelis, ke ta xanthunta tu levanu exelipe. The one pressing together the sea, it continues, and who God is. The sea, the thalasi, the thalactic, has to do with the oceans, and xirenon, drying, cirrhosis, the dryness of the skin, the one drying it up. And he parted the seas when the children of Israel went across it, and he dried up the sea in other places. He has control of the nature. And the one making quite desolate, exerimon, the erimon, we have a hermit, which is a person that lives by himself. Ex making it more stronger than the word would appear with this preposition that's added as a prefix. Many Greek words have prefixes that begin with prepositions, epi, ex, para, so, sort of very similar in English. And so he's making quite desolate Pontus. We have pan for all, pandemic, control over all the people, pan. All the Potamus, the rivers. We have the Potomac River, the river in Washington, D.C. That's what it means. A hippopotamus. Hippo is a horse and a potamus is a river horse. And then he continues, Bashan and Carmel are lessened, these places, the mountains, and the blossoming of Lebanon failed, this beautiful area north of Israel. Things are happening. In verse 5 it continues, the mountain, the ta ori esisti son apavtu, ke ivuni esalevthi son, ke anastali igi apo prosopu avtu. E simpasa ke pontus e catikuntus in afti. The mountains, the ori, the orology, mountains cease the sun, the seismic, the mountains shake from him. And the hills, asalev, the sun, are shaken. And igi anastali, the earth, the gi, geology being the derivative, rises up at his presence, as in when a great one, everybody rises up when the king walks in, our president, and when God, the earth rises up at his presence. He has control. The mountains shake because God has put him into motion, and the hills. The whole, it says, and all, Pontus again, the ones dwelling in it, and even the ones dwelling on the earth are under his control. And verse 1:6 continues, apo prosopu orgis avtu tis hypostisate, ke tis antistisate in orgi thimu avtu, o thimos avtu, tiki archas, ke e petre diathrivisan ap avtu. From in front of his orgis, an orgy is a English derivative of this, some type of orgy is taken on a sexual term with English today, but the orgy has to do with an anger, this fervency. Who shall stand in front of his anger, and who shall stand and who shall withstand in the orgy of his thimu? Again, the thimu, we had fume, the anger of his rage. When these two words are together, then that means it's very angry or very wrathful. It's the height, the orgy thimu. And when this is mentioned, then this is the height of God's anger, and it's interesting when these two words appear. And his rage, themos, melts away archas, melts away sovereignties. The archas, we have a monarch, single ruler, and here we have in the plural sovereignties. His rage melts away sovereignties. And the rocks, the petrae, we have petroleum, oil from a rock. Petra is a rock, are broken because of him. So he controls the sovereignties. We like to think that democracy in the United Nations controls sovereignties, but God uh, is the ultimate controller of these things. Continues in verse 7. Christos Kyrios tis ipomenousin avton in imera thlipsios, ke genoskon tous evlavumenus avton. The Lord is gracious, so to the ones waiting upon him, not necessarily the enemies. Although we can be enemies of God, he actually still is gracious, but he's gracious with a limit, because in many places he has the enemies being destroyed, and he hates certain attitudes and behaviors. But he's gracious here, it says, to the ones waiting on him. When? In the day of affliction. Imera, ephemeral, thlipsios. The day of affliction, we have put together a little brochure on the word, and in this case it's two words, day and affliction. It doesn't have every listing of day and affliction, but it has, when these two words appear together, and give you an idea of what it's talking about, this day of affliction. It mentions in 2 Kings the 19:3, thus says Hezekiah, a day of affliction and of rebuke and provocation to anger in this day. For the son came up to birth pangs, and there is no strength to give birth. In Isaiah, thus says Hezekiah, that was 2 Kings 19:3, and say it's basically the same thing in Isaiah 37:3. Obadiah 1:12, it says, and you should not have looked upon the day of your brother in a day of strangers, and you should not have rejoiced over the sons of Judah in a day of their destruction, thlipsios, and you are not destruction, and you should not have spoken great words in a day of their affliction. So there's going to be a day of affliction coming upon everybody. We have afflictions happening to us, and there's a day of affliction. It also mentions a day of the Lord when it brings in this affliction. In Zephaniah 1:14-16 it says, for the great day of the Lord is near, and near very quickly. The sound of the day of the Lord is uttered up, bitter and harsh. That day is a mighty day of anger, a day of affliction and distress, a day of misery and extinction, a day of dimness and darkness, a day of cloud and fog, a day of trumpet and a cry against the fortified cities and against high corners. Zephaniah is talking about a day of the Lord, and it has affliction. In this place in Nahum, it's a day of affliction, but it could be this day it's talking about in the future. Revelations talks about 10 days of affliction in chapter 2, verse 10. Behold, indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you in prison, that you should be tested, and you shall have 10 days of affliction. Thlipsios. Be trustworthy until death, and I will give to you the crown of life. And then it mentions days of affliction. Not a day of affliction, but days. It's going to last more than one time. And immediately after the affliction of those days, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give its brightness, and the stars shall fall from the heaven, and the forces of the heavens shall be darkened. Says Jesus in Matthew 24:29. And he continues in Mark 13:19-27, and he says, for those days will be an affliction such as has not taken place with this kind from the beginning of creation, of which God created until the present, and in no way shall be. And unless the Lord cut short, or could be lopped off, the days, not would any flesh have escaped. But on account of the chosen ones whom he chose, he cut short, or lopped off, the days. And then if any should say to you, behold, here is the Christ, or behold, there, do not believe. For shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and they shall give signs and miracles, to lead astray, if possible, even the chosen ones. But you take heed. Behold, I have described beforehand to you all things. And in those days, after that affliction, The sun shall be made dark, and the moon shall not give its brightness, and the stars of the heaven will be falling off, and the powers, the ones in the heavens, shall be shaken. And then they shall see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And then he shall send his angels, and they will assemble his chosen ones from the four winds, from the uttermost part of the earth unto the uttermost part of heaven. This shaking Jesus is mentioning in here, be shaken. And in Nahum it's talking about God shaking. And it mentions this day of affliction that we are to call upon God. Psalms 50:15 it says, "And call upon me in a day of affliction, and I shall rescue you, and you shall glorify me." And in Psalms 86:7, "In a day of my affliction I cried to you, for you heeded me." And so that's what we are to do, because God is with us in the day of affliction, we're told in Genesis 35:3. "And rising up, let us ascend unto Bethel, and let us make there an altar to God, to the one taking heed of me in a day of affliction, who was with me and preserved me in the way which I went." That's what Jacob said. And in 2 Samuel 22:19, "They anticipated me in a day of my affliction, and the Lord became my stay." Well, and then let the Lord heed you in the day of affliction. Let the name of the God of Jacob shield you. Psalms 20, verse 1. Gracious is the Lord to the ones waiting on him in a day of affliction, and he is knowing of the ones venerating him. So when this day of affliction comes, if we are with him, then he is going to be with us. And it even mentions a rest in the day of affliction. In Habakkuk 3:16, "I watched, and my belly was terrified from the sound of the prayer of my lips, and trembling entered into my bones, and my part beneath. My manner was disturbed. I will rest in a day of my affliction, for me to ascend to the people of my sojourn." In other manuscripts it has until he ascends to the temple. So this gracious is the Lord to the ones waiting on him in the day of affliction, Nahum says, and he is knowing, gnoskon, the gnosis, the gnostics, the knowers of the ones venerating him. He knows the ones that venerate him. In verse 1:8, "Ke in cataclysmo porias sintelion piisate tus epigerumenus ke tus ecthrus aftu dioxate skotos." And in a flood, or by a flood, a cataclysmo, we have almost a direct transliteration, a cataclysm, and that meant generally with water, originally in the Greek. By a flood coursing, he shall execute the pia, when we see these letters, the pi, p, omicron, iota, has to do with a doing or making, or the poet being the derivative, and he shall execute a consummation of the ones rousing up. And darkness shall pursue his enemies. Skotos, we have a skotoma is a diminished vision, a problem in sight. Skotos, darkness shall pursue his enemies. Continues in verse 9. Ti logises they, epi ton kyrion, sintelion aftos piisate, uk ek dikisi these, epi to afto en thalipsi. What do you devise against the Lord? This 304:9 could be highlighted. The logises is the verb. Logistical is a English derivative. What do you devise? Epi, against. The kyrion. He himself, the aftos, automatic. He himself, piisate, 4160, will make a consummation. He will not punish twice. These, we have the These, the thee is a prefix for two, a dichotomy, a division into two contrary parts, or a diode, two-terminal conductor. He will not punish twice for the same thing with affliction. So what he does is going to be once. It's not he's going to come back and keep doing it, but when he means it, this thimu argi, it's going to be the real thing, and it's going to be an affliction that's going to take effect. It's not going to miss its mark. It's not going to have consequences that he doesn't foresee. Verse 10, it continues, Oti eos themeliu aftu hersothisate, keos smilax periplecomeni vrothisate. For the enemy, it's in italics, I added that, will be made barren unto his foundation. And as a yew tree being twisted, he shall be devoured. This periplecomeni is a twisting in the crown of thorns how they put on Jesus. And that as a yew tree, he shall be being twisted. These yew trees are all twisted around, and he will be devoured. And it come and as stubble, as kalami, exiranthisate mesti, and as stubble, he shall be dried up fully. In verse 11, that's the enemy shall be dried up. The xiranthisate, we have xerosis again. Verse 11, exu, exolevsate logismos, kata tu kiriu, poni ra vulevomenos enantia. Ek, from, eccentric, or from, you shall come forth a logismos, a logistics being the derivative. The verb was earlier in the last chapter. So from you will come a device. Who is you? Against kata, a cataclysm, something that's against, an inundation against, a cataclysm against the Kyriou, against the Lord, from you. He's talking about Nineveh, and we can assume that that's what he's still referring to here. So a device, planning poni ra, adverse to him, planning wicked things, adverse to him. So this king of Nineveh, of the Assyrians, is planning things against God. We see that when later Sennacherib of the Assyrians come against Hezekiah, and how they berate the living God down below the walls of Jerusalem. And so they're planning a device against the Lord. They know who the Lord is, the enemies, the Ninevites, because they come and they take over all these different peoples that have different gods, and then they come against Israel, which went into idolatry and took over Israel and then many of the cities in Judah. And they bring the accusation to Hezekiah that we have done these things against the God, the Lord, Yahweh. And so he's with us. And Hezekiah faces that dilemma that he's in. They're actually saying that the Lord is with them. But here he's saying that there's going to be a device against the Lord. They are going to use the word the Lord, the person of the Lord, against his own people. In verse 12, it continues, Tade legi Kyrios, katarkon, idaton polon, ke utos diastalisonte, ke I akoi su uk enakousthisate eti. Thus says the leg, we had the speaking, logos, the leg, is a verb. Thus says the Lord, Kyrios, who rules many waters. And so they shall be drawn apart, and the report of you shall not be listened to attentively any longer. So they are going to be coming, and the report, the akoi, we have acoustics, they're hearing of you, shall not be listened to any longer. There will come to an end to this attack by the king in Nineveh when he comes against it. They will not. It's going to come to an end, more or less. Here he's saying. And verse 13. Kenin sin tripso tin rabdon aftu aposu, ketus thesmus viarixo. And now I will break his rod. The rabdon is the small rod that the kings would hold, mainly, especially the Roman emperors would carry this rabdon, the rod. When I was in Greece recently, the abbot of the monastery on the island of Patmos, I had a picture taken with him, and he had grabbed a hold of his staff. It's a long one. I said, "Is that a ravdon?" And he said yes, and that was the rod of authority. I will break his rod from you, and the bonds I will tear up, the bonds that the Assyrians will put on the people in the land of God. In verse 14, it continues, Ke enatilte, whoops, let me start over again. Ke entelite perisou Kyrios, ou sparisate ek tu onomatosou eti, ex iku theusou, exolothrevso ta glipta, ke honevta, thesome tafin su, oti tachis. And it says, and the Lord, the Kyrios, should have had that highlighted, shall give charge concerning you. There shall not be sown the report of your name any longer from out of the house of your God. So even in Nineveh, this ruler's name will no longer be mentioned or sown, heard from his house. Iku, economics, has to do with taking care of a house or a building, administration of your theou, theology of your God. I will utterly destroy the glipta. We have the English derivative, a glyph, and glipta. I will utterly destroy the carved images. And you can add that in the English derivatives book if you'd like, number 1099.3. And the molten images. I will establish your burial, and that quickly. The tafim, we have a cenotaph. It's a memorial monument of somebody that died, and it's not where they're actually buried, but it could be someplace else, such as when I was used to go to Catalina Island. The cenotaph was there for Wrigley, who owned the Wrigley Gum and the Chicago Cubs football team, but he wasn't buried there, but there was this huge monument, cenotaph to him, and it has to do with your burial, and that quickly. In verse 15, Idhu epi ta ori ipodus evangelizomenu ke apangelontos irini iortaze iuda tas iortasu apodos tas evkasu dioti umi pros thosin eti tu dielthin diasu is paleosin. And it continues, behold, upon epicentric, something upon, the ori, or, mountains, the feet, the podus, tripod, the feet, evangeli, zomenu, we have mentioned before, the angeli. This actually evangelizing is the English derivative, and it's ev is good, and the message, angeli, angel, good message, an angelos, is a messenger or an angel, announcing, evangelizing. And apangelontos, we have the angelos, the a alpha gamma gamma with the op in front instead of ev. Over here it's ev, announcing good news and reporting, Irene, peace, Irene being the English derivative, the name of a person meaning peace. This is the real famous verse, behold the mountains, upon the mountains, the feet announcing good news and reporting peace. So there is this report coming to the people of Judah eventually when it's talking about it. Now it brings it into the New Testament, how it's mentioned in the New Testament for Jesus, people announcing the evangelizing. So it's actually a quotation from this place. Solemnize, O Judah, your holidays. Holy days is a word which it means a holy day. Render your vows. The avka, this purple, means that this word is has the word on the word pamphlet on it. You can find out about vows and rendering vows. For it was something that was done in the Old and the New Testament. For in no way should they proceed any longer to go through you, for they should have grown old. So this going to be a time that they will be able to do things and the enemy will no longer go through their area. And it's a prediction, a prophecy in the book of by Nahum the prophet that he is giving these people, but they will face the Assyrians shortly. And we will go into the second chapter on the next seminar and continue where it goes into this destruction of Nineveh, and we'll give more information. So until the next time, may God bless you, and we'll see you. Bye.